Welcome, travelers, to the sands of eternity, where the whispers of an ancient world still echo. This is Egypt, the cradle of one of the most mystical civilizations in human history. More than 5,000 years ago, a culture unlike any other emerged along the fertile banks of the Nile. These people were not only architects of breathtaking pyramids, but also of a spiritual realm brimming with gods, legends, and enigmatic rituals. Imagine a world where the sun wasn't just a celestial body, but the god, Ra, sailing his golden barge across the heavens each day. Where the afterlife wasn't a mere belief, but a journey through perilous trials, detailed in the sacred Book of the Dead. Their rituals, a symphony of shadow and light. Priests dressed in elaborate robes chanted ancient prayers to awaken divine statues, while the air grew thick with incense, believed to bridge the gap between mortals and gods. But perhaps the greatest mystery lies in their obsession with eternity. Why did they mummify their dead and bury them with treasures? What secrets did they hide in their labyrinthine tombs, guarded by curses said to last forever? Tonight, we unravel the veil of the mystical culture of ancient Egypt, a world where the boundary between myth and reality fades, and every shadow tells a story. Prepare yourselves for a journey into the enigmatic heart of the ancient world. Are you ready to unlock the mysteries of the Nile? His hands trembled as he clutched the trinket, its golden sheen flickering in the torchlight. He barely heard the murmurs of the crowd around him, angry voices, accusing whispers, and the steady thud of footsteps that carried him deeper into the temple's shadowed halls. Before him, draped in robes of white and gold, sat the revered high priestess, her piercing eyes as ageless as the stone walls around them. The boy froze as her gaze fell upon him. "Do you know," she began, her voice smooth and haunting, "what becomes of those who steal from the gods?" He moved his head in negation, sweat dripping from his head. "Come sit with me, and I shall tell you the cautionary tale of Nefari, a grave robber who dared to defy the divine. This is tale of not very long ago. This was the time when the sacred feather of Mayat was cursed. Its corruption caused the balance of Mayat to unravel, unleashing the chaos and restless spirits into the mortal world. The dead no longer stayed in their tombs, and whispers of a spreading curse chilled the hearts of the living. And all of this was a result of a negligent act similar as done by yourself, young boy. A young scribe named Nefari, who was secretly a grave robber by night, unknowingly targeted the temple of Mayat and stole the golden amulet that was specially blessed by the gods to protect our sacred feather of Mayat. Without the amulet's protective magic, the feather became vulnerable to manipulation, enabling Ramses, who was a common man just like everyone else, to corrupt it through forbidden rituals. His body decayed as a result of the ritual, leaving him in a state between life and death. His skin became ashen, his eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and his voice carried the echoes of the drought. He became a servant of Apep, spreading chaos wherever he went. Ramses could summon restless spirits, manipulate shadows, and drain the life force of others. He believed that by destroying Ma'at and replacing it with chaos, he could create a world where betrayal and injustice no longer held power, ironically becoming the very thing he hated. The gods sensed the theft and viewed it as an affront to divine law. They cursed the thief responsible, tying his fate to the feather's desecration. Nefari was marked by the gods when he stole the amulet. This mark tied him to the feather's fate, making him the only one who could undo the curse. After the theft, one night he was returning from his usual late-night walks when he heard his name being called inside a tomb. It was pitch black, but the humanly curiosity inside him urged him to explore who was calling out his name in the tomb. He lighted his lantern and made his way to the tomb, following the voice calling out his name. As he reached the inside of the tomb, his lantern flickered weakly, barely cutting through the suffocating darkness of the tomb. The air was thick with the scent of decay and age pressing against Nefari's chest like a living weight. His footsteps echoed eerily in the narrow corridor, but they were no longer alone. Faint whispers began to creep through the silence, slithering along the cold stone walls. The sounds were low, guttural, and alien, an ancient tongue no living soul could speak. Nefari froze, his heart pounding like a war drum. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling as it broke the oppressive quiet. The whispering grew louder, multiplying until it filled the space, 1,000 voices speaking in unison. The hieroglyphs on the walls seemed to shimmer in the dim light, as though alive, and from the shadows ahead emerged ghostly figures, their forms pale and translucent. They wore the tattered shrouds of the long dead, their faces obscured by masks of gold and painted plaster, chipped and cracked with age. Eyes, dark, hollow voids, stared out from behind the masks, and their heads tilted unnaturally as they regarded him. Nefari stumbled backward, his torch shaking in his hand. "Stay back!" he shouted, though his voice wavered with terror. One figure stepped closer, its movements jerky, as if it were a puppet held by invisible strings. The whispers crescended into a deafening roar, and the figure raised a bony hand, pointing directly at Nefari. A voice, louder and clearer than the rest, cut through the cacophony. "You disturb the eternal rest. You defy Ma'at's balance. You must pay the price." Suddenly, the figures surged forward, their forms dissolving into tendrils of shadow that wrapped around him, pulling him to the ground. The whispers turned into an anguished scream as the torch extinguished, plunging the tomb into absolute darkness. And in that suffocating blackness, Nefari felt the cold touch of skeletal hands gripping his flesh, dragging him deeper into the abyss, where the forgotten dead waited to consume him. The next morning, when he woke up on the pavement of the tomb, he didn't realize he was alive. Last night, he was sure that it was his last on the face of the earth, but here he was alive and boiling in fever. He came back home having a vague idea that now he will face the wrath of the gods, but he had no idea what was waiting for him ahead. Quite a few days passed, and he started his tomb ventures again. Then, one quiet morning, the first rays of dawn filtered weakly through the dusty window panes of the decrepit hut. Nefari stirred on his cot, his body aching from the previous night's ventures into the tombs. He groaned, rubbing his eyes, and rose unsteadily to his feet. The mirror on the opposite wall caught his attention, its cracked surface reflecting a dim version of the room. But something was wrong. His reflection was already there, staring back at him. Nefari froze, his breath catching in his throat. He was standing several feet away from the mirror, yet the figure within moved, as though it were directly in front of it. Its head tilted unnaturally, and its lips curled into a crooked smile. A smile Nefari wasn't wearing. "What?" he began, but his voice broke as the reflection stepped closer to the glass, pressing its face against the fractured surface. Its eyes, wide and hollow, locked onto his. Suddenly, it raised a hand, not mirroring his movements but acting independently, and pointed at him. The finger seemed to pierce the mirror, a faint crackling sound emanating from the glass. Nefari stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, and fled the room. His heart thundered as he burst through the front door into the crisp morning air. He bent over, clutching his knees, and took deep, ragged breaths. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows on the sand. But as Nefari straightened and turned toward his own shadow, his blood ran cold. It wasn't his. The shadow moved with a life of its own, its elongated form swaying and stretching unnaturally. Nefari took a step back, but the shadow remained rooted in place, craning its head as if observing him. Suddenly, it lunged toward him, elongating like ink spreading through water. Nefari screamed and staggered, but the shadow wrapped itself around his feet, pulling him down onto the sand. Its cold touch slithered up his legs, gripping tighter with every passing second. "You cannot escape!" A voice hissed from all around him, low and echoing like the wind through a crypt. "You carry the curse of the desecrated." The sun above dimmed as if consumed by the shadow itself, plunging the world into unnatural twilight. Nefari thrashed and clawed at the sand, but the darkness consumed him, dragging him into its depth. His screams were swallowed by silence until he had no more energy left in him to scream. He had now clear idea of what he had done, and now what was lying ahead. Guilt and remorse filled inside him, twisting his gut. He returned home that night, but kept on twisting and turning in his cot, thinking what should his next step be. He didn't realize when he fell asleep. The night was still, suffocating in its silence. Nefari stirred in his bed, the oppressive heat clinging to his skin like a second layer. His dreams had been uneasy, filled with whispers and fleeting shadows. But now, something far worse yanked him from slumber. The air in the room had changed, thick and cold as though the desert's warmth had fled. A faint, foul smell, a sickly blend of decay and ancient incense, filled his nostrils. He sat up, his pulse quickening, and froze. At the foot of his bed stood a figure cloaked in tattered ceremonial robes, their fabric faded and stained with the passage of millennia. The face beneath the hood was twisted, a rotting expression with sunken cheeks and empty sockets that somehow still burned with an unnatural light. The skin, dry and leathery, clung to the bones, and fragments of gold adorned the skeletal remains like a mockery of ancient splendor. The figure raised a bony hand, its movement slow and deliberate, and pointed at Nefari. When it spoke, its voice was not one but many, a discordant chorus of echoes from the underworld. "You have disturbed the balance," it hissed. "You have stained Ma'at's sacred feather with your greed." Nefari recoiled, pressing himself against the wall. What are you?" he stammered. "I am a guardian of the eternal truth," the corpse rasped, stepping closer. With each step, the ground seemed to tremble faintly beneath its feet. "You defiled what was pure, and now Egypt suffers for your sin. The gods grow silent. The Nile falters. The sky weeps no more." The room shuddered as if in response, and Nefari felt the weight of the warning sink into his chest. He thought of the relentless sandstorms that had battered the land, the earthquakes that had split temples, and the parched soil where crops refused to grow. It all began to make sense. "It was just a trinket," Nefari protested, his voice cracking with fear. "A relic. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" The figure's hollow sockets flared with a spectral light. "You tore from the divine what was meant to guide the balance of all creation. Restore the feather to its purity, or the gods will abandon this world to chaos." As it spoke, the temperature plummeted further, and the walls of the hut seemed to dissolve into shadow. Nefari was suddenly surrounded by visions of devastation, crumbling temples, villages swallowed by dunes, the Nile reduced to a stagnant trickle. Screams of the suffering filled his ears, drowning him in despair. The figure leaned closer, its decayed face inches from his own. Its breath, cold and fetid, sent shivers down his spine. "The end begins with you, thief. Restore what you have stolen, or face an eternity of torment as the destroyer of Ma'at." In a rush of wind, the figure disintegrated into ash, leaving Nefari alone in the darkness. The silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of abandonment, of a world on the edge of ruin. He sat there trembling as the realization consumed him. The earthquakes, the sandstorms, the drought, all of it was his doing, and only he could stop it. But could he return the feather in time? Or had he already doomed Egypt to chaos?